Ironsides to Mateo's Magic Bus on KFFR 88.3 FM. Really excited to have you guys. Joe Ramey, Max Ramey, Jamie Payne. Welcome, guys.
Thanks
for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Lots to talk about. We could go on for, I'm sure a good hour and a half, and we'll try and keep it to 15-20 minutes, but really excited about you guys' new album coming out, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But you know, for our listeners that are just getting to know the Ironsides and you three, I'd like to hear, you know, just a little backdrop on the band and how it was formed. Joe and Max, you guys are the originators, as I understand it, and each of your, you know, just a snippet on each of your own personal journeys. So if you guys could give us a little backdrop on the band, and then each of you, your influences and loves of music.
Yeah. You know, the band started, I mean, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, was it like 2008 or 9 when we first started assembling a crew of people to play some obscure music and covers?
Yeah, I'd say 2009-ish. Yeah, it's kind of the origin. Yeah.
So so it started with us just wanting to play like really cool obscure tunes that we loved, and you know, so many other bands were kind of playing a lot of just standard kind of like funk and soul, and we kind of wanted to find, you know, play those old kind of obscure tunes, and so we kind of put a band together to start just doing covers at little clubs and, you know, places around the Bay. So that was like what it started in about 08, 09, and then kind of the evolution was we ultimately kind of wanted to create a band that was really centered on like cinematic soul, cinematic kind of type music that we really loved. And so we started wanting to do like more of a recording project and, you know, write in that vein and just try to like really explore that territory that we thought was, you know, there are bands doing it, Menahan Street Band and, you know, El Michaels, all those guys from, you know, Daptone and all that. But I think we kind of wanted to do it a little more like orchestral. But
where did that come from? What was your influence? What was your inspiration for that? Where's the origin point?
I think we were just listening to a ton of like David Axelrod, you know, this, I would say a bunch of Italian cinematic stuff, just like Serge Gainsbourg, you know, all this European stuff, but just really, for lack of a better term, like film music, you know. And so
I think also, Max, I think, like, remember we got kind of really deep on the CTI catalog.
Yeah.
And kind of Ethiopia Peaks, even like a Malatia Stake and that whole series, and just kind of got really down with even some more soul jazz type instrumental music that kind of led, that kind of overlapped with more cinematic European, you know, and David Axelrod, of course. But yeah,
totally. So yeah, I mean, I think those influences were just hugely important to like our ultimate goal of doing something like that. So that was ultimately, it took us about 10 years to realize that, but
a fine wine takes time, right?
Yeah. So that was kind of like, so we had that kind of cover band that we went to wanting to create this kind of orchestral cinematic thing. That was around the time we recorded the Raven and Song for Adrian, which were kind of the first, that was our first 45 on Colemine. And so that was like I think we cut it in 2011 or 2012, and then it ultimately came out in 2013.
Yeah, that's right.
So that happened. I'm trying to make this brief. That happened, and then, you know, we kind of kept trying to write and record, but ultimately, you know, we wanted to get out and play as well. So that time we met Gene Washington.
Yep. Huge.
Yeah, so we started like, okay, well, maybe we can shift our focus and start doing this kind of thing, just playing the soul stuff, because we also, we love that music too. So
Yep.
those things just seemed to it was kind of a serendipitous moment. It was like, okay, well, let's shift gears here and put this on hold. It's a big lift to do something that's kind of that grand. So yeah, it was kind of a little departure from the cinematic thing, and we did a couple 45s with Gene. We played a bunch of gigs with Gene throughout the Bay, and we did some things with like on the West Coast. We toured actually with Monophonics for like one small tour. But so then ultimately those kind of things, like I think we started feeling this, and that was Jamie, that was when you kind of came into the scene as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I just want to say real quick, wow, it's funny because you guys were doing that cinematic stuff with the Raven and everything, and that was the 45 that we were selling with those first shows that we were playing.
Right.
And it was funny because I joined on and we were doing that the Gene thing, but before we were playing together, I was also, and it's funny that we're doing this orchestral project now, but I was like really inspired by more experimental stuff. And like I worked in Boston for a recording engineer, recording 20th century classical music. I was into like Harry Partch, and I really liked like Randy Newman's film scores, and like, and just all kinds of classical music and experimental music. And then I deviated as well, doing and I grew up playing all kinds of different, learning from the soul musicians and whatnot. So we did that. Now we're kind of like back in that space where we're like, all right, let's draw from our instrumental roots that we all really love, while we try to
And
develop
Jamie,
our own sound.
while you have the mic, how did you first get into the soul? Like what was your connection, inspiration there? What brought you to that?
Well, I mean, it was just growing up listening to, my mom played a lot of Al Green, a lot of Motown. And then when I started studying guitar when I was like 12, that was all the stuff that I brought to my private instructors, asking for them to teach me how to, basically all the Muscle Shoals guys is what I grew up. That was what I was listening to when I was 12, learning those parts and everything. And I got connected with these guys, like they were saying, in like 2012. So I had that history, but I also had my like weirdo experimental thing too.
Well, that's funny because the last interview I did was Eli Paperboy Reed, and he cited Muscle Shoals too as like a foundational element, and
Sure.
his music's in the same atmosphere as you guys, but definitely took a different part of that direction of all that amazing stuff down in Muscle Shoals. So super cool to hear that's an
And
influence.
I'm just kind of realizing now, like how wide the three of our tastes are, and how, at the time, maybe we didn't even see that while we were just trying to get stuff done and continuing to work, but there really is a connection on multiple places, like pop music essentially, and then also this instrumental music. And like right now we kind of are doing like a pure version of ourselves. Like we're trying to really hold ourselves to make original sounding music, and also trying to help to push the Colemine archive forward while we do that. I mean, what is music if it's not trying to find the newest, purest thing for yourself, So
Yep.
Yeah, and a little bit more about that too is like we all come from musical backgrounds, so it's kind of going a step back from that is all our dads were guitar players. So Jamie's dad was a great flamenco guitar player. Our dad was a jazz and classical guy who did that his entire life from the age of 13 as a professional musician. So when we were kids, we would hear classical kind of guitar emanating through the house. We'd be listening to Bartok and Stravinsky and Bach, and so all that music was always around us. And I'm sure the same is true with Jamie. So those influences, jazz too, just kind of, I think, percolated into our consciousness, if that makes sense, at a young age.
Absolutely.
Osmosis. No, that's the best way to learn. It's like learning when you're skiing when you're 3. You don't even remember when you learned. It just happened. And music is and you absorb so much when you're young, and that's phenomenal. I do want to get to the album and make sure we give that its due. There's so much there. I'll quote changing light is coming out, and we've been we were lucky to I think we were the first radio station to play the web some weeks back on live on the air, and you know, excited to bring that to our audience. And you know, as I talked to you guys before we started, my first experience with the album is I think I listened to it probably like 5 times in a row before I put it down. And so, you know, the idea of melding in the term that is used a lot is psych soul, with the sweeping orchestral arrangements and you know, cinematic soundtracks, 60s European film. Those things are key elements of it. You know, let's sort of tease that apart and talk about the album and the process. How long you guys? I know it's been in the works, like you said, for maybe over a decade. But in earnest, you know, what was the deciding point, you know, when you guys said, all right, we're gonna roll up the sleeves and do this? And then what was the process like?
Yeah, I think you know, Terry and I were talking because we just came to this point where, you know, we really wanted to focus on it after the Gene thing. And so I had a discussion with Terry, and I was like, man, I really want to, you know, we all really want to make this record that is really grand, and it's something that we've always wanted to do. And you know, we talked about it, and Terry was fully supportive, and you know, I just want to say he's been so crucial to like us and our foundation and supporting us from the beginning. So he's been incredibly amazing that way. So after talking about that, and he kind of gave us the green light to go ahead, I mean, we were able to really start writing and thinking about you know, these big orchestral things. And we knew Lou King from New York because we've done some work with him in the past, and he, you know, phenomenal arranger and just like a brilliant mind. And so we just started thinking, hey, if we can write these songs that are, you know, really vibey, atmospheric, and we collaborate with Lou, you know, he can really flesh this out and create these really beautiful, big symphonic tunes. So, you know, that was kind of how it started. And then, you know, we spent so much time like just hunkered down writing these songs and collaborating with Lou back and forth. Jamie, obviously, you know, we'd spend a lot of time just giving Lou feedback, and Joe, like talking with him, and you know, we'd send him a track, he'd write to that, then we'd listen, provide notes. You know, it was just kind of this back and forth collaboration, but it was really a beautiful thing. I felt like it was just really I feel like we all really worked well together, and it felt really natural. So,
And
yeah,
I'll say there was a lot of discovery in the process as well. You know, I think it was right at the time the pandemic had set off. You know, it was March. You know, I mean, I moved back from Nashville in March, and I wasn't sure what was going on. They had already essentially had these discussions with Lou and with Terry. And then I got back on board, and what y'all told me at the time was that Lou was kind of like, well, you know, the discussions you're having with him, Max, is that like we will discover what we're doing in the process. And so as a core, we got together and started writing essentially tracks. And then, you know, the back and forth started with Lou. And since we were learning the process, the next one will build on what we've already learned. So it might take a shorter amount of time, but also that was such a wild time, you know, so much contributed to taking 3 years. But I will say that like, as we continue to write the music, our style and our ability to execute something, such a big concept grew and grew. And you can almost, you know, within the album hear a change in the songs, you know, and it's pretty granular, you know. Obviously it's a through composed, great sounding record all in all, but there's something in the process. And honestly, I kind of like how the album, has different feelings, and it really represents kind of the precarity of the situation about the pandemic. Our first relationship with Lou, the first time we were kind of venturing out and doing such a grand project with Colemine, again, Colemine's archive up to that point, like all of these things were considered.
Yeah, it's almost like
a moment later,
It's almost like totally. It's almost like there were like different chapters within the record, like like writing the record. There's just these little different chapters. It's really a trip.
Yeah, just writing. The process of also just writing during the pandemic, and this kind of, you felt like at times we were in this. It was just kind of it almost feels like a once in a lifetime type moment where there's all this emotional energy that's going on, and we don't know what's going on, and we all have such a brotherly connection, us three having played music so long together. It was just kind of really powerful. When I look back at it now, really is an incredibly powerful emotional experience to be writing with three people that you love, and to find a kind of fourth person, that's just perfect kind of for what we've been looking for so long, and just having it come along at this kind of dramatic time in all of our lives. I think a lot of that, for me, it lent itself to the vibe and the emotional energy of the record. You can kind of hear that, I think, in the record.
Mm-hmm.
It's a trip to look back too, real quick. Can I just say one more thing? Go ahead. It's a trip to look back, because when we first started, we were like in each other's bubble. We had the protocol, and the recording studio was like, it was so much more work to deal with the restrictions of COVID, and everyone wanting to feel safe. All 22, 25 musicians we had that we were bringing into the studio was all like, at first when we started writing, we made sure that we had a quote unquote bubble that was going on in 2020. And then we had to expand that to the studio. And so looking back on that footage that's now getting posted now is a trip, like all the masks and just remembering those times. It's like, it's nice to reflect on how wild of a time that was to be taking on such an endeavor, such
for
added stress for everybody involved, that's all I want to say.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And in terms of the album and the flow, as I listen to it, and pardon the references, but just using it as an example, like I'm on my last show, I played something off XTC Skylarking, which the album Todd Rundgren, beautifully kind of wove. It's one song. It's hard to take one song off of there because they all really weave together. And when you think of this album, are you thinking of it? It almost sounds like you could just take it and make I would take it and make a movie around it, like where it just kind of flows through like a movie soundtrack, even though it was written, separate of a production like that. Were you thinking of it that way, or are the songs, more isolated stories, or what was the writing process like there?
Either you guys want to take this?
Well, I will just say, Max, you kind of came up with the concept of something you'd want to throw on in your car and drive up the coast to, and we wanted movement within the album as well. We didn't want it to be all that sound, so we made sure that the flow of the album, had peaks and valleys as well. So if we felt like we had enough of this vibe, we would try to write a different vibe, And I also will say, with the Todd Rundgren reference, for him, he really reminds me of like your classic, like 70s-ish, songwriter. And, one of the things about the three of us is we're always hipping each other to different bands that we're listening to. And at the time, Max was really into Jim Ford, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think that sound kind of contributed, like the acoustic guitars and whatnot, the jangly acoustic guitar sounds on the album.
Are you thinking Jim Sullivan
and Jim Ford? That was the other one I was gonna say. Just that jangly guitar. Well, Jim Ford has that orchestral, the Highland County.
Yeah.
And then Jim Sullivan is just like a pit, like that's
the
like
UFO
Todd Rundgren for
record.
musicians,
Is that the UFO record?
Yeah,
that's a crazy record.
I think also like it was kind of freeing, because sometimes you think, like in previous records that I've made, like trying to be like, oh, we need an up tempo tune here, or like this too much, some of this stuff is too slow or too mid tempo. Like we kind of didn't think about things at all like that on this record. It was kind of like, is this the right vibe, regardless of like tempo? And intensity. So it was kind of like a freeing moment for me, at least, to just be like, this is like a real, like one song could be a real a certain feeling, the other one could be a certain feeling, but it didn't have to be, this is up tempo, this is mid tempo, this is slow. It's like it felt really freeing that way for me.
That was a big part. Yeah, you brought that up a lot for sure, and we really held true to that, right? There were times, though, I will say, we're like, all right, let's get a banger in here. Let's get a couple,
I also think too, like, when you're writing, and I don't know if this is true for everyone else, but for me, I'm not necessarily, when I'm writing, and I think this is true of us, but we're not always like directly conscious of like, hey, let's do this exactly, or it's a lot of times just feeling the thing out, and us being so kind of we have such similar tastes. It's kind of like, it kind of happens in this weird unspoken way where we kind of search out a feeling, and then we know that it's when we kind of know it's right when we reach it. I think there'd be times in writing where we'd all kind of look around and go, we're kind of there, we're kind of reaching something magic. And I think I just remember that being really kind of a cool part of the process, just being like in a room with people and then searching for something, and then when you hit it, you all kind of look at each other and nod like, yeah, this is working, this is happening.
Yeah, I think for the web, we spent like 2 hours just on the one main groove because we were like,
3 sessions. We did 3 separate writing sessions just on the main groove. That's what it was. It was all about refining, and the web is a perfect example. You listen, you go like, oh yeah, I think like in that way all the time when someone says, oh, play something a little bit funky, a little bit, but for whatever reason, we spent forever getting that song dialed in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. No, it's I mean, there's so many layers, and it's almost hypnotic, the way some of the music affects you, and I find myself drifting off and just which is good, like, in a good way, and not thinking about other things, and it really takes you away, with, like you said, you want to hop in a car and drive for a couple hours when you put this on. So I love that. I love that analogy. I do want to also talk about sort of what's next, and what you guys are going to do when this launches and stuff, and we'll end on that. But I do want, we play a lot on Mateo's Magic Bus. We play a lot of Colemine music. I'm a big fan of the label and what they've been doing, what they stand for, and you guys are a big part of that. And there's such a great ecosystem. I mean, you've already mentioned a couple, Gene and Monophonics, and how important is that? I mean, it seems like you all are kind of in a really good way feeding off each other, and Colemine's sort of a campfire there a little bit in terms of being able to kind of hold that space. How can you shed any light on that?
Yeah, I think there's a real sense of like community just amongst like all the artists on that label, and Terry and the team, that they're always so supportive, and I think they really want to push music as much as like the artists do. Like they really care about having variety on their label, but also like keeping a certain standard and a certain quality. And I think it's just really important to have people that care about music that own labels like that. You know what I mean? Like they really care about the music as much as the musicians. I think that's just so important, and so in a lot of ways really unique.
He's also branching out a little bit now with with Steve Okonski.
Yeah.
And Rudy, that music, and then Refined and Gabbard, I believe.
Yep.
He's pushing as well. Terry and those guys are trying to again expand their sound into this other realm as well right now, which is very cool to see.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't played those guys, the other ones you just mentioned yet, so I'll definitely tee them up. So what's next? We're gonna have a big launch. We've got a few more songs we can start playing on the radio in the meantime, which we will. And the launch is in May, and then we're hoping a tour, follows. We either have to come your way, or hopefully, Colorado's on the agenda there at some point too. But what do the next months look like? And then, Jamie, you alluded to, further efforts and albums, down the road, maybe in the same vein.
Yeah. Well, basically, we're already working on stuff. We have a couple drafts out to Lou that we've added some notes on, and we're doing that kind of like internal work of figuring out what the next step is. Obviously, when we want to take a step forward, we don't just want to have a repeat of what we just had. And we're building off, like I said, we're building off of our process and also the precedent that we set stylistically. So we're making sure that we're pushing forward. We're doing a little more keyboard driven stuff. The last album was completely guitar driven as far as the rhythm section goes. We've invited some possible keyboard into the core of our writing. We're writing in a new spot. As far as the tour goes, Max and I were just kind of talking about this. I mean, with 25 musicians on each song, it's a little rough to think about playing that, but there's been talk about possibly doing some one-offs, or possibly figuring out some kind of arranged down version of it, and having that at the ready if we are able to get the funding to play some live shows. So I know we all would, I mean, it would be a dream to be able to play this music live. It's just a matter of figuring out how it is, but we have not given up on that. We are trying to figure that out, and we're really yearning to just figure that out. Yeah.
If we could find a few rich patrons, man, that could like fund, a $10,000 show, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're gonna put that out into the universe then, and I have a feeling when the world gets a taste of this album, it's you might have a few folks showing up at your door.
Appreciate that, man.
Yeah, definitely. Well, anything you guys can think of, any parting words or thoughts that have come up that we didn't touch on before we close down this episode, but which I hope there'll be many more.
Man, not that I can think of. You guys?
I just appreciate you two. Appreciate the spins out in Colorado. I consider Colorado my second home. These guys are like brothers. I feel like the third brother in so many ways, and I think that's really what is at the core of this group. Is just the similar mindsets. I think even within my closest circles, regardless if we play music or what, that's kind of what bonds us together. So, yeah, love you guys.
Yeah,
Likewise, man.
likewise, for sure.
Keep buying records from Colemine as well.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, appreciate it. Best of luck with the album launch, and we're looking forward to that 25-piece tour.
Thanks, man.
So much.